Think you know everything about the Middle Ages? Think again. From terrifying superstitions to gruesome practices, the Dark Ages were full of chilling surprises that will make your skin crawl. Welcome to a spine-chilling journey back in time, where the Middle Ages weren't just about knights and castles. Beneath the surface, this era was filled with eerie beliefs, bizarre rituals, and horrifying customs that you probably never learned about in history class. In today's video, we're revealing the creepy side of medieval life. Prepare yourself for some unsettling facts that might just change how you see the past forever. Medieval society wasn't just divided into three simple classes. It's a common idea that medieval society was neatly split into three orders: those who prayed, those who fought, and those who labored. This description, often referenced by historians and medieval writers, seems to offer a straightforward framework to understand medieval life. The first category refers to the clergy, the second to knights and other warriors, and the third to peasants or workers who tilled the land. However, by the 12th and 13th centuries, this idea became increasingly inaccurate as society evolved. During the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe experienced a massive surge in population, and with it, a significant expansion of cities and towns. In fact, the population growth in urban centers like London and Paris was staggering. These two cities, for example, grew by roughly 10 times their size during this period. But the real surprise comes when we consider the diversity of people working within these cities. While peasants continued to work the land, urban areas were full of merchants, salesmen, carpenters, butchers, weavers, food vendors, architects, artists, jugglers, and even entertainers. Some people had the right to vote. Another surprising aspect of medieval life is that, at least in some places, people could vote. While it is true that there was no national representative government like the ones we have today, there were forms of local elections that involved significant portions of the population. In 12th and 13th century France, many towns and villages operated as communes, which allowed male inhabitants to vote in local elections for consuls and councillors. These elections were held annually, and the majority of the male population had the right to participate. In the city-states of northern Italy, the political systems were even more complex, with multiple tiers of elected officials. While women were generally not allowed to vote or run for office, some charters acknowledged women's rights in certain cities, particularly those in France, though these were exceptions. The idea of voting for local leaders or representatives in some form is surprising to many who imagine medieval society as completely lacking democratic processes. These early examples of local governance challenge the notion that medieval people were entirely disenfranchised. The church didn't conduct widespread witch hunts. We've all heard stories about the medieval church persecuting witches, but this is not as accurate as it seems. While there were witch trials during the Middle Ages, the idea that the church was heavily involved in these hunts is a misconception. In fact, the major witch hunts that are often associated with the medieval period actually took place later, during the early modern era, particularly in the 16th and 17th centuries. During the Middle Ages, the church's official stance on magic was largely dismissive. Church leaders viewed magic as superstition or nonsense, and they did not actively promote witch hunts. The first significant efforts to prosecute witches in the medieval period occurred in the 15th century, especially in German-speaking regions. These prosecutions were carried out by civic authorities, not ecclesiastical ones. Even when Heinrich Kramer wrote the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, in 1486, the Catholic Church did not initially support the book. Medieval thinkers also experienced a renaissance of classical learning. When we think of the Renaissance, we often imagine it as the time when Europe broke free from the intellectual darkness of the Middle Ages and embraced classical learning and humanism. While the Renaissance in the 15th century is indeed known for the revival of classical models in art, literature, and thought, the Middle Ages itself also witnessed an intellectual renaissance, one that laid the foundation for later developments in science and philosophy. In the 12th century, there was a renewed interest in classical works, many of which were translated into Latin from Greek and Arabic sources. This intellectual awakening was not confined to Italy or the Renaissance period, but was instead spread throughout Europe, especially in the monasteries and universities. A significant part of this intellectual revival came from the works of Aristotle and other ancient philosophers, which had been preserved and expanded upon by Arabic scholars in the Islamic world. These texts were translated into Latin, and scholars in Europe began to incorporate these ancient ideas into their own studies, particularly in philosophy, logic, and science. People traveled and traded over long distances. It's a common myth that most people in the Middle Ages lived their entire lives in the same place. While it is true that many people, particularly in rural areas, lived and worked close to home, there were also extensive networks of trade, pilgrimage, and travel that spanned great distances. These networks helped to connect disparate regions of the world, especially as the Middle Ages progressed. Pilgrimages were one of the most common reasons for long-distance travel. Pilgrims would travel for hundreds, even thousands, of miles to visit holy sites such as Jerusalem, Santiago de Compostela, or Canterbury. Some of these journeys could take years to complete. Similarly, merchants and traders traveled long distances to exchange goods, often bringing luxury items from far-flung corners of the world. Silk from China, spices from India and Southeast Asia, furs from the Baltic, and amber from the northern reaches of Europe were all traded across vast distances, demonstrating the global nature of medieval commerce. Medieval festivals and customs were quite lively. In addition to their religious practices, medieval people also engaged in a wide range of festivals, celebrations, and customs that may seem surprising to us today. Some of these customs had deeply religious or ancient roots, while others were more secular in nature. For example, one of the most well-known medieval traditions was the rolling of burning barrels down hills on Midsummer's Eve. This was a custom observed in many regions across Europe and likely had ancient pagan origins. These vibrant celebrations were sometimes officially sanctioned by the Church, but often represented more local pre-Christian traditions. Similarly, tossing wheat over the heads of newlyweds was a common practice that symbolizes fertility and good luck. Another interesting tradition involved raising money for charity by hosting a help ale. Villagers would brew large amounts of ale, host a party, and invite the community to drink it in exchange for donations. These events were not only social occasions, but also helped to support the poor and fund charitable causes. 7. You didn't need a church to get married. Medieval marriages weren't always solemnized in churches, despite what we might think. While the church began to emphasize marriage as a formal sacrament by the 12th century, medieval couples could marry simply by exchanging consent in front of witnesses. It was only later that the church insisted on the presence of a priest, the reading of the marriage banns, and the performance of a formal ceremony in a church. In fact, for much of the Middle Ages, marriage could be as simple as a verbal agreement between a man and a woman, provided that there were witnesses present. The church would have liked to make marriage a sacrament, but many medieval couples didn't need any formal church involvement to consider themselves legally wed. Writing was considered a manual labor. Contrary to modern assumptions about literacy, writing was viewed as a form of manual labor in the Middle Ages, often performed by scribes who transcribed the work of intellectuals, theologians, and other learned figures. Many of the great thinkers of the time, including theologians and philosophers, relied on scribes to do the actual writing for them. The process of writing was time-consuming and labor-intensive, and often it was considered beneath the dignity of intellectuals to engage in it themselves. This practice was akin to modern voice recognition technology. Just as we might dictate a letter or an essay to a digital assistant, medieval scholars would dictate their ideas to a scribe, who would write them down by hand. Some people in the Middle Ages weren't very religious. While the Middle Ages are often associated with religious zeal, it's important to recognize that not everyone during this time was intensely devout. Many common people questioned key religious beliefs, such as the authenticity of miracles attributed to saints or the true nature of the Eucharist. In fact, there's ample evidence that some people viewed religion with skepticism. For example, some individuals came to believe that the soul was nothing more than blood, and when they died, they simply vanished. Others felt that there was no reason to attribute crop growth or agricultural success to divine intervention, believing instead that it was simply the natural process of cultivating the soil. Medieval people knew the world was round. Finally, one of the most enduring myths about the Middle Ages is that people believed the world was flat. In reality, educated people in the Middle Ages knew that the Earth was spherical. This misconception likely stems from Victorian-era portrayals of the medieval period as a time of ignorance and superstition. Similarly, the popular image of Viking helmets with horns is another falsehood. There's no historical evidence to support the idea that Vikings wore horned helmets. This myth was created during the 19th century as part of a romanticized view of the past. The Middle Ages were a time of complexity, diversity, and innovation. From the surprising levels of social mobility and democratic participation to the thriving intellectual movements and rich cultural traditions, the medieval period challenges many of our preconceived notions about the past. Far from being a dark and primitive age, the Middle Ages were a vibrant and multifaceted period that laid the foundation for much of the world we live in today. So the next time someone tells you about the Dark Ages, remember that history is far more nuanced than it might seem. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Middle Ages, don't forget to subscribe and let us know what period or civilization you'd like to explore next.